Number 1.
4 years ago, I was on a camping trip in the Gila National Forest in New Mexico. I'm from a small town on the Arizona-New Mexico border, Duncan if you care, but I live in St. Louis, Missouri. When I say small, I don't mean it doesn't have a Walmart small. I mean if I stood on my roof, I could see where the town ends small. But it was a good upbringing, although extremely boring. I had a week off of work and had been planning this trip for months. My best friend Dave, his brother Daniel, and his brother's girlfriend Ida, who had long grown tired of the Idaho jokes made in her whole life, and now went by her shortened middle name, Beth. Obviously I wouldn't include this last bit if it wasn't important, so keep that in your back pocket for now. We were all experienced campers and outdoorsmen. Daniel had actually met Beth partial hiking in the Appalachian Trail, and Dave and I had spent time doing walkabouts in the Ozarks and Smokies with one trip up to the Boundary Waters, where we lost a pack in a capsized canoe and had to survive off the land for a few days before we got to someone with a satellite phone. This is important because you need to understand that we all knew our way around the wild. We didn't scare easily and knew that 9 times out of 10, the animals were afraid of us. On our first night, we made camp exactly where we were supposed to, around 6 miles from the trailhead, down the middle fork of the river. We found a nice quiet spot by the riverbank about 30 feet from the water. It was dark and the fire was small but warm, and the food that you make while camping always tastes better than when it's cooked at home. We were quiet and the stars overhead seemed close enough that if you reached your hand out, you could brush them away like sand from a blanket. The only light came from a half moon hung low in the sky through the trees and our fire. The euphoric peace was crushed by the absolutely unmistakable sound of coyotes that echoed throughout the trees behind us. Those who have never heard them may think they're basically dogs and they sound like barking, but that's not the case. Coyotes cry, they shriek and yap. Some people think they sound like children crying out in pain. Beth heard them first and turned her flashlight to the north. We could tell they were a long way off, but when you hear something like that, you instinctively look for a source. Daniel said we should pack up tonight and that we didn't need any scavengers like that getting into our food or trash. We agreed, even though the likelihood of anything getting close to us was very slim. Bears had been sighted recently, so it was better to be safe. We repacked anything that could attract unwanted attention, and in the process let the fire die down to embers, all the while hearing the crying on the north. It was then we all saw it. A single coyote sitting in the dark, watching us about 30 to 40 yards out of our camp next to a small mosquito tree. We could see its shining, iridescent eyes in the dark, thanks to the little fire, and they shined bright like emerald mirrors when flashlights were shined in its direction. We heard his pack to the west again, but he didn't react beyond turning an ear to that direction. Dave asked if he should shoot it, since coyotes are vermin around here, but we all said no, it hadn't done anything and it may have just been curious. Dave had a .500 Smith & Wesson revolver as black bear deterrent that he kept in a leg drop holster on his left leg since he was left-handed. It was getting late and we had a big hike the next day, so after everything was put away, we got in our tents and went to bed. I didn't sleep too well that night, and every time I looked through the mesh window of my tent, I saw those 2 unflinching iridescent orbs in the darkness. The coyote was gone when we woke up. We broke camp and buried the fire. Not disturbing the environment was important to us, and we made sure to leave nothing but footprints. Beth and Daniel were the first to notice something wrong though. The mesquite tree that the coyote was close to was much bigger in the daylight, and there were absolutely no tracks to be found. Dave quickly explained that it was too dry for good footprints, and the coyote was probably closer than we thought in the darkness. I wasn't convinced. We were camped on a riverbank, so it should have been at least a little wet, but there was no need to incite a panic over nothing. Plus, it was gone now, so who cares? We had about 2 more days to the plateau with a night at the top, and when we got about a half an hour into the hike, Daniel stopped. He was sure that he had his knife the night before, but it was now missing from its sheath on his pack. He decided that we should go on ahead and he would run back down to the campsite. It should only be about an hour behind us, less if we walked slow, and he had plenty of experience on his own. Besides, we got smart, and Daniel rented a satellite phone for $50 for the week, so if he got in trouble he could call the park rangers. He said he would be back long before dark when we had camp set up, and he should have been. The trail at that point wasn't tough. He wasn't back. We set up the camp at the meadows and got a fire going. The sun had set and the last light was leaving the sky. The red and pinks of the sunset gave way to the purples and blues of the night. We were discussing whether or not to send someone out to look for him when we heard fast, heavy footsteps. He was running, winded and trying to say something. He didn't have his pack. Bear, I thought, and looked at Dave, who already had his gun out ready to put down whatever came up the trail after his brother. Daniel was gasping for air. He collapsed at Beth's feet, holding himself with his arms. Beth screamed, asking if it was alright, what was wrong, and if he was hurt. I reached in my pack and retrieved my camp axe. It wasn't much, but it was better than the small 3-inch knife I kept in my hip pocket. Nothing came after Daniel though. He was still panting when he turned over to sit on the ground. "It's not Coyote," was all he could say for the next 15 minutes in between drinks of water from my camelback and gasps of air. He repeated it over and over. I looked at Dave, who had never seen his brother like this. Daniel was an Eagle Scout and fairly large guy, about 6'2" and 200 pounds, and wasn't the type of guy to get spooked by animals, even if they were big ones. Beth never let go of him as we made food that night. One of the tents, some of the food, his sleeping bag, and one of the 2 cooking pans had been in his bag. A day hiker actually found it and it was sent back to him weeks later. When he got a hold of himself and was able to breathe normally, he told us what happened, punctuated by deep breaths and a vacant look as he was trying to decide if what happened to him actually happened. He said that he had almost reached the river when he realized how quiet it was. He heard no birds, no bugs, no wind. He barely heard the river, which at this point was little more than a trickle, when the night before it was shallow but at least 15 feet across. He looked up the trail to see the coyote from the night before, but standing on 2 legs, like a man 40 feet from him. He said it stood 6 feet tall and didn't dance around at all, trying to stay up like a dog does, who's trained to balance on 2 legs. He made it a point to mention that its mouth was closed as it just stared at him. A deep, primal fear seized him and triggered his freeze instinct. He said he locked eyes with it for a minute that seemed like hours, when he finally had the sense to try backing away. No sooner had that thought entered his head did the coyote let out the most unnatural coyote cry he had ever heard. He said it wasn't deafening in the sense that your ears are left ringing, but it was deafening in the sense that the noise is all you can hear even after it stopped. Daniel wasn't stupid enough to think that he could outrun a coyote, especially one of this size, so he had to think quick. He slowly took a step back, fully expecting the animal to charge, but it didn't. Too afraid to look away, he crouched down and felt for a rock, a big stick, something to defend himself with, but there was nothing but small pebbles. It began to open its mouth and Daniel stood up. The animal's eyes rolled back in its head and it slowly opened its mouth, too wide to be natural. This obviously put him over the edge. His flight response kicked in and he took off back towards us, an hour away. Running full tilt back down the hiking trail, he heard the cry one more time a few seconds later, as deafening as ever. He heard the shifting of gravel behind him and the sounds of footsteps. The coyote was running after him. Whether it was on 2 legs or 4, Daniel didn't know, but he didn't risk slowing down to look back and see. He was horse-collared by his backpack a few feet later. From his knees he slipped it off and ran as fast as he could. He knew the coyote should have been on him within 20 yards, but there were no footsteps behind him. He ran as long as he could before he slowed to a walk. Winded, he turned around to see nothing. He heard a snap in the forest to his right, and he saw it as it reared up on its 2 legs again. He couldn't run far, but it was the only chance he had. He stopped to walk whenever he was too tired to run anymore, but every little twig snapping or rustling in the forest became the coyote in his mind, driving him forward. Eventually he could see our fire light through the trees and broke out into a sprint. He said he nearly passed out more than once, and that pure fear kept him running. Obviously at this point our trip was over. We had half the food and half the tents, not to mention whatever was following us. We didn't have much choice regarding what to do that night though. It was dark and we had to try to hike back out the next day. Daniel wouldn't sleep unless someone kept watch, so we slept in shifts. The tent we had was a 3-person tent, so that David and I could keep our packs inside with us, as well as other supplies while we slept, so it wasn't a big deal to cram 3 of us in while the other kept watch. We stayed up between the tent and the fire for an hour and would then sleep 3 hours while the others took their turn. Dave left us his revolver with instructions to shoot to wound, not kill with the first shot, but not to hold back if any follow-up shots were necessary. Just in case we were shooting at something that wasn't our coyote, we could probably help them. God forbid we shoot a person hiking the woods at night for some reason. He took the first watch, Beth took the second, and I took the third. Beth woke me up at about 1:30 a.m. She was obviously scared. Before I could say anything, she put a finger to her lips. She was silently crying and looking at Daniel. I got up out of the tent and looked around. The forest was still, except for the wind in the trees. The wind blew the tall grass, and it bent as if an invisible hand brushed the tops of the blades. Visibility was obviously limited, but we could see the tree line surrounding most of the meadow. Beth and I silently looked at each other and the surrounding area for 5 minutes before speaking. I wondered why she woke me up instead of Daniel when she finally spoke. She said to me in a slow whisper, "I heard my name," with tears still slowly rolling down her cheeks. I told her it was okay, we were all shaken, and that the wind-bending branches could make a B sound, and through leaves could make a TH sound, forming Beth. She was shaking her head. I didn't hear Beth. The hairs on my neck and arms stood up. She swore she heard Daniel's voice coming from the trees calling her real name. She looked in the tent to see if he was still there, and when he was, she was too afraid to wake him up. I stayed awake with her for half her shift, trying to hear what she heard, but the only noise came from the occasional bug and the sound of the wind. We were so focused on listening that when it was my turn to take watch on my own, the fire had died down to almost nothing. This gave me something to occupy my time though, so that was okay. Unfortunately, rebuilding the fire took less than 15 minutes, and was left with nothing to do but be alone with my thoughts for the remaining 45 minutes. This was the first time I really had to think about what was happening, and how ridiculous everything sounded. I believed them though, both Daniel and Beth. Growing up on the border of New Mexico gave me many opportunities to talk with native Navajos. I knew that what was out there perfectly fit the description of a skinwalker, an evil Navajo medicine man who had inherited the ability to shapeshift into different animals if he wore their skin. I had seen some weird stuff in the desert as a kid, but nothing like what Daniel had seen. We weren't far from the reservation, so it made sense, but they don't exist, right? Plus, I was told I didn't have to worry about them. A native kid I went to high school with told me that, as racist as it sounds, they can't hurt white people. But now I wasn't so sure. I thought it was just superstition, so I never asked how to fight them. I began to fear an encounter. What if it was real? If so, why did it want us? What would I do if it attacked? Would bullets hurt it? And if not, what then? Would I die out here in the wild, victims of some ancient ritual? My fear turned to dread. How would it kill me? My death was inevitable. We could call the rangers and police or something, but it would take hours for them to reach us. By then it would be too late. Looking back now, I'd think I was being irrational, but I now know that a sudden, deep-rooted fear is a sign of a supposed skinwalker nearby. My shift was almost done. I had almost forgotten about the gun beside me on the log I was sitting on. I almost didn't hear it. A small twig snapped loudly. Through the waves of heat and sparks escaping the fire, 2 unmistakable iridescent orbs shone amidst the darkness of the meadow before me. My heart was in my throat. I shot up off the log and raised the gun. The eyes disappeared into the dark. Did I imagine it? Was I so afraid of this thing that I had envisioned its eyes locking with mine through the flames? The cry to my right shattered my thoughts. It couldn't have moved that fast, could it? It sounded like a coyote, just one high-pitched shriek, But that wasn't the only sound there. Over a year later, I would be at an outdoor concert. I was one of the first people in the gates, and the sound tech had not muted one of the mics on stage. When a gust of wind blew through the empty amphitheater and reached the mic, I froze. The low, quiet rumble of the wind emanating from the subs that shook my core froze me in my tracks. That's as close as I can come to describing the noise beneath the singing shriek of what I heard. I turned. There, off to my right, standing upright, was the beast. Its forearms weren't raised in a beg position like a dog. They hung awkwardly in front. Its mouth was closed as it stared me down from the tree line some 90 feet away. I heard Daniel gasp in the tent next to me. He knew it was back. Beth stifled a scream through her hands. Through more sheer terror than I had ever experienced, I unloaded 3 shots in its direction, forgetting all about shoot to wound. The .500 kicked way harder than I anticipated, and at least one of my shots flew far into the treetops above the creature. I was sure I hit it with 1 shot though, because it took a step back on 2 legs. Then, with speed, unlike anything I had ever seen, it ran straight across the meadow right for me, on 2 legs. The others came pouring out of the tents now as all of this had taken place over the course of about 30 seconds. I fired again and hit it again in the chest when it got about 60 feet away from me. After the second hit, it dropped down on all fours and jerked 90 degrees. It ran towards the tree line to my right behind the tent and picked up speed as it disappeared into the tall grass. I fired 1 more shot where I thought it would be before David yelled at me to stop. The revolver was a 5-shooter and he didn't have much ammunition. He thought he would only use the revolver against bears and figured if you can't put the bear down in 5 shots, it's over for you anyway. We didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Its image haunts me to this day. Eyes rolled back, mouth open too wide as it gave a cry from another world. I gave the revolver back to Dave and he reloaded it with what little ammo he had left. Just a small pocket-sized 20 round box with only 15 left. None of us slept again that night. We packed up camp and waited by the fire until first light. The plan was to begin hiking as soon as we could and call the park rangers to get out and meet us on the trail as soon as they could. We knew it'd be more than a day's hike, but if the rangers could meet us on quads or ideally a truck, we could get back to safety off the trailhead quickly. We called and told them we had been attacked by something in the night. It turned out that the guy who answered, Roderick, was a Navajo and he got real quiet as we described what we saw. In a very serious tone, he said they'd bring out 2 side-by-sides and they'd get out in the next few minutes. He also told us that if we saw it again, not to look at it in the eyes. He said he knew what it was and that we were lucky a few bullets deterred it, for now. Hiking back down the trail, we were all extremely on edge. Every moment in the corner of our eyes was the animal. All of us had weapons out, silently walking, eyes constantly scanning. Dave was in front with the gun and he stopped momentarily, causing all of us to stop. Not 10 minutes from our camp was the body of an elk. It wasn't torn in half, its entrails didn't spill out all over the trail in a bloody mess. The skin was gone, and the head, and something had eaten much of the top of the rear leg, but it was largely untouched by the scavenger animals of the forest. We would have heard a hunter the day before, and no trophy hunter would leave the carcass in the middle of the trail like that. I think that thing wanted us to find it. It wanted us to know what it was capable of, what it planned to do to us. We didn't see a single animal the rest of the hike, living or dead. When we heard the motors of the side-by-sides heading up the trail, we all breathed for what seemed like the first time since we broke camp. Roderick was driving the first one. He asked if we were all okay and if we had seen it again. We said no, but we told him about the elk, which he brushed off and told us to get into the vehicles. He didn't really want to talk about what he thought it was, but I knew. He had us all fill out a report upon getting to the ranger station, but told us to hang around there for a few minutes. He walked out of the station with us and told us that he didn't know what exactly we saw, because he wasn't there, but to him it sounded like something that his people don't talk about because they get power from the verbalization of their name, that they feed on fear. It was clear that he thought it was a skinwalker. He also told us that it would make him feel better if we received a blessing from a good medicine man on the reservation. Beth wanted to go, but the rest of us just wanted to get out of New Mexico. Roderick drove us out to our car, and within 3 days we were back with our families back home. After that, we drove to Phoenix and flew back to St. Louis. I still wake up at night when I hear coyotes crying. They live in the woods behind my house. I always go back to sleep when I realize that they're just coyotes and nothing more. I still hike and backpack, but it took a while to get back. Out of the hundreds of times I've been out, this was the only time I had ever been attacked by anything. I've gotten into Native American paranormal sightings since I left New Mexico, because if skinwalkers are real, I'm not saying they are, why not Wendigos? Why not the Whistler? Why not Sasquatch, the big water snake, or the Piasa bird? There's not a satisfactory ending to my story, because it's not a story, it's a reality. There's no edgy cliffhanger or goosebumps-inducing final line. That's it. That's my real story. Number 2. I always loved visiting Grandpa in the woods. He lived up in the mountains of Montana, completely isolated, the nearest hut being a good 30 minutes drive away. He was a tough old man. Our grandma died years ago, so my grandpa, a person seemingly born in the wrong century, decided to move into isolation. Now that I'm in my 20s, I've really come to appreciate the isolation. No cell phone service, no internet, only a landline phone. We spend most of our time up there hunting, fishing, hiking, or exploring. My little brother and I go about 3 times a year. My little brother and I had arrived at his cabin 4 days after Christmas. It was early evening, so we settled in his cabin. At night, we usually sit around the fireplace, have a few beers, and tell stories. Sometimes they're funny stories about Grandpa's time in the service, other times he tells scary stories. My little brother got excited when asked to tell a story. He said he read a scary story about Wendigos, men turned into monsters. The Native Americans say Wendigos are people who participated in cannibalism, and it shapes them into something terrifying. A man's body with a deer's head, hoofed feet, and all sorts of mystical powers. The power to change into animals or even mind control. While my little brother was telling us the story, I noticed Grandpa's face. He suddenly got very serious and stopped my little brother halfway through the story. He said that's enough talk of Wendigos and that it's bad luck to talk about them. We all went to bed shortly after. We woke up early the next morning. The forecast predicted some light snow, and it would be a perfect day for ice fishing. We geared up in our cold weather gear, packed enough food for 2 days just in case something happened, and put on our snowshoes. We started down the hill from the cabin and were making decent time. Grandpa knew these woods like the back of his hand, and after years of visiting him, both me and my brother had a general sense of where we were. The morning started off plain enough. Grandpa was leading about 20 yards ahead of me, and my little brother was 10 yards behind me. Following someone with snowshoes is incredibly easy. The footprints Grandpa was making were impossible to miss. I remember hearing a humming, like the distant sound of an air conditioner. I glanced to my right where I thought I was hearing the buzzing, looked forward again, and Grandpa's footprints were gone. That was the first thing I noticed. The second thing I noticed was the humming, and third was the dead silence, save for the humming. I looked back at my little brother, relieved he was still there. He walked up to me, stopped, then asked where did Grandpa's trail go. I answered I don't know, and we decided our best course of action was to double back, try to pick up Grandpa's trail again. I knew we were about 2 miles to the lake and we turned around, and I also knew that we were headed in the generally correct direction. We followed our own trail again for 5 minutes. Suddenly, Grandpa came storming out of the woods.
"You dumbasses,"
he yelled at us. He began telling us about how stupid we were, how could we possibly get lost with his trail being so obvious, that we were smarter woodsmen than that. I stopped him and told him that his trail and he just disappeared on me, that we followed our own trail back to hopefully pick up on his. He said about 10 minutes ago he turned around and noticed that we were just gone and only his trail was present. His eyes suddenly grew wide. "I hear buzzing," he said. He looked at the both of us and said we needed to make it to the lake. I suggested we got back to the cabin, but he said no. He pointed up the hill where his cabin was, and we could barely make out a white wolf. Whiter than the fresh snow, unnaturally white. I pulled my binoculars up and saw it was looking directly at us. Not moving, just staring. I asked Grandpa if it was dangerous. He said not in the way most wolves are. He began muttering under his breath while wildly scanning the forest. I had never seen this behavior come out of him before. He quickly stated we make straight for the lake, no more than 10 feet apart. He pulled out a rope and made us all tie it to our gear. He always carried a .44 revolver when we were in the woods, no matter how far he walked from the house. Grandpa pulled his revolver out and stuck it between his belt. We reached the lake about 4, and the sun looked like it was going to set in a few hours. Grandpa led us out on the lake, stopped in the middle and said, "We'll camp here." And if you've never been camping before, a campfire is a big reason for camping. You can't have a fire on the ice, and we were exposed to the wind and whatever else was out there. Grandpa asked for my binoculars and began scanning the shoreline, while my little brother and I set up our sleeping bags and covers. My little brother mentioned hearing something about buzzing. He said it sounded like a beehive that was a little ways away. He suddenly stopped, looking around, and was locked onto something. "Is that a wolf?" he asked. He said nothing, handed me the binoculars, and pointed. When I looked in that direction, I saw one tall figure and 2 figures that seemed to be wolves. Looking through the binoculars, I could see a human-like figure. I say human-like because it had the head of a deer, unnaturally long fingers and a hunched-over stance. Its skin was a pale tan and it had patches of dark brown fur. Its legs and arms seemed just a little too long for normal persons, and the movement was jerky, like it was getting used to being on 2 legs. "What the hell is that?" I asked. Grandpa said that sometimes Native Americans would wear skins while hunting to blend in with the animals they were hunting. My thoughts immediately turned to, there is a mentally challenged and physically deformed Native American out there with 2 dogs who happen to look like wolves. My little brother asked what they were doing, as they seemed to be circling the lake. They would move around on the shore, look at us, look down at the lake, and move again. Grandpa said that they were trying to get on the ice. They continued circling the lake, but the deer man or one of the wolves would always be looking at us. After sundown, Grandpa relaxed a little, said we should go get sleep, and we're moving first thing tomorrow morning. I noticed the absence of the buzzing sound. However, I did not get much sleep because of the cold and whatever else was stalking us in the woods. We woke up at sunrise and ate some food out of the MREs we brought. Grandpa was nibbling on a pancake and scanning the shoreline with the binoculars. He didn't spot a sign of them, and after an hour of waiting, we packed everything up. Grandpa said we needed to move and fast. Once again we tied a rope between the 3 of us and began to hike up to the cabin. Grandpa's pace was unusually fast. My little brother was having trouble keeping up. We hiked for about 2 hours without incident, when suddenly the buzzing came back. It made all of us stop dead in our tracks, and we all began scanning the forest. It was very loud now, like we were standing next to a swarm of cicadas. Only cicadas do not come out in the winter. We looked ahead on the trail, and a white wolf was standing in the middle of it, on its hind legs. That's when I realized it didn't look like a normal wolf. Its teeth didn't fit in its mouth, some of its claws looked like fingers. There were patches of missing fur on its underside, and it let out this high-pitched, ungodly scream. And that's when we all blacked out. When I woke back up, I saw my grandpa and little brother laying down. First thing I noticed was the buzzing was almost deafening. The next thing I noticed, we were apparently set in a triangle formation, with the deer-headed man in the middle of us. The deer man was more grotesque up close. It had ribs showing, it had pale skin with patches of fur all over its body, one antler was missing several points. The two wolves, or whatever they were standing outside the triangle on their hind legs. All three were looking up in the sky and chanting. It did not sound anything remotely human. It was like a series of garbles, barks, screeches in a language I could not understand. My grandpa was the next to wake up. He quickly pulled out the revolver and fired 3 times in quick succession at the dear man. There was only screeching now, and the instant he fired the 3rd round, there was a flash of white light. It was brief, but incredibly bright flashlight. All 3 of whatever the hell they were just disappeared. Next, my little brother woke up.
Move now!
My grandpa shouted. He sounded terrified, and I've never seen the man scared or even cry before.
To the cabin! Move! Go!
There was more screeching coming from the woods. 3 different things screeching the exact same scream. Grandpa lifted my little brother up with one arm.
Move, you shit!
He shouted. I ran ahead of both my grandma and little brother. When I reached the bottom of the hill of the cabin, I didn't see them. I didn't see or hear anything. No buzzing, no screeching, just the occasional gust of wind. When I got into the cabin, I shed my backpack and sleeping roll. I immediately went for my grandpa's rifle and nearly tore the cabin apart looking for ammunition. I had locked, then barred the door with a chair, ready to move it the first sign of my little brother and grandpa. Then I waited for what seemed like hours. I was coming down off my adrenaline rush when I suddenly heard 2 more shots. A minute later, I heard 1 shot. That has to be my grandpa, I thought. Then nothing. I could only hear my breathing and the ticking of the clock. Hours passed with no sign of my grandpa and little brother or those things in the woods. The sun was going down. I was still completely on edge, and I thought about going out and looking for them. I dismissed the idea, whatever was out there is still out there. I decided I would leave the first thing in the morning, go to town, and immediately notify the police. At about 10 at night, I heard the distant buzzing again. It was very faint, but it was noticeable, as there was no other sound. Then I heard scratching at the door. The moon was bright enough to illuminate something like a deer head peering in the woods. Then I heard it speak, or trying to speak. It certainly didn't sound human or animal, but for some reason, there was a hint of my grandpa speaking. Its voice was inflecting and changing pitch constantly. It said or screeched to me, "You move, you shit." It repeated this, and then something was trying the door handle. The door handle moved slowly, then it began shaking. The whole door began shaking. Then it started banging. Something started moving on the roof. Every time it repeated the phrase, it got louder. This went on the entire night. At around 5 in the morning, I heard more loud screeches. It sounded like there were more than just 3 things out there, but the screeching went on and on. Finally, 15 minutes later, it just stopped. Nothing. Completely stopped. The only sound was the clock. After the entire night of this, I decided I would make for the truck an hour after there was no sign of these things, make it into town, and tell the police what happened. Eventually there was a missing persons alert. The police found a truck a mile from the cabin that had crashed into the tree. The driver's side door was completely ripped off, with what appeared to be claw markings running near the edges. There were animal tracks all around the crash site, as well as the cabin. The cabin was completely destroyed. The front door was ripped off, and it was concluded that a bear had attacked the person inside after the driver had crashed the truck. They only found 1 body, a teenage boy with a bullet entry wound in the forehead. Hey guys, it's that Grim Raider here. So, thank you very much for listening through that. I appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed, what are you doing? Come on, you've got to subscribe. I mean, you might as well just slap a like, just throw in a comment here and there, you know, just because you can, really. I mean, nothing's stopping you from doing it, right? Nah, but seriously, thank you very much for listening through. If you want to listen to more stories like this, on the screen, you can click on either video, That's the 2 previous videos. Or you can go in the description and there's also a link to the previous video. There's also a playlist link which will lead you to a lot of videos very similar to this with hundreds of awesome stories like these. So yeah, with that I leave you with thank you very much, and you'll hear from me very soon.